August 1944 dawned over Rechlin like any other summer morning in the heart of Germany. But for Luftwaffe Captain Hans-Werner Lerche, the day carried a weight unlike any other. He arrived at the test center with a mixture of anticipation and unease, the late summer sun cutting through the thin haze over the airfield. The aircraft waiting for him was unlike anything he had ever encountered, a Vought F4U Corsair, captured after an Allied raid, sitting sleek and menacing on the tarmac, its long nose promising untold speed, its inverted gull wings casting strange angular shadows. No manuals, no technical documentation, just the metal and him. Lerche approached the aircraft cautiously, notebook in hand. The Germans had managed to smuggle it intact from a crash site in France, but they knew almost nothing about its inner workings. Rumors had flown through intelligence channels. The Corsair was supposed to be a Pacific monster, capable of outclimbing and outrunning anything the Luftwaffe could field. Today, he would see for himself. As he circled the aircraft, noting the broad wingspan and the distinctive bent gull shape, he ran his fingers along the fuselage. The craftsmanship was impressive, almost alien to a man accustomed to the clean lines of a Bf-109 or the brute efficiency of an FW-190. The engine, a monstrous 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800, roared in readiness when he started the ignition. Lerche felt the vibration through his boots, up his spine, into his hands gripping the control stick. The Corsair was alive. Climbing in, Lerche was immediately struck by the cockpit layout. Unlike German aircraft, which favored simplicity and immediate tactile feedback, the Corsair's cockpit was filled with unfamiliar gauges, levers, and switches. He made a mental note. He would have to learn by feel, by instinct. 30 minutes of ground familiarization left him nervous but curious. The takeoff roll was unlike anything he had experienced. The Corsair surged forward, the nose lifting with an almost aggressive confidence, the tail wheel lifting sharply, and in a few seconds he was airborne. Lerche instinctively compared the acceleration to the FW-190A8, the benchmark of German fighter engineering. The Corsair was brutally fast off the deck. He felt the aircraft respond to every subtle input, the control surfaces heavy but precise, the engine screaming with raw, uncompromising power. He pushed the throttle forward, testing acceleration. The airframe shivered, the wind screaming past the cockpit canopy. Lerche's eyes widened. The climb rate was astonishing. Numbers etched in his mind immediately. 40% faster climb than the FW-190A8, an engine torque that demanded constant attention, but an energy retention that made vertical maneuvers almost effortless. He performed a series of loops and rolls, noting how the Corsair handled the high G-stress. Its wings, inverted gull and broad, absorbed the load, giving him confidence to push harder than he would in any German plane. Lerche's mind began running calculations as he climbed to higher altitudes. The energy retention, the acceleration out of dives, the ability to trade speed for altitude, this was not merely superior, it was transformative. A conventional dogfight, head-on, in the traditional Luftwaffe style, would be suicidal against this aircraft. He ran simulated engagement patterns in his mind. The Corsair could dive, zoom, and climb away before the FW-190 could even register the attack. It could dictate the fight, something German pilots had long prided themselves on doing. He began experimenting with turns, testing gun platform stability. The Corsair's wing-mounted Browning M2s presented a different challenge. Recoil was manageable, but tracking a target in a high-speed engagement revealed subtle vibrations, likely caused by the wing's shape and engine torque. Yet even here, Lerche noted the advantage. The aircraft did not lose energy in sustained turns the way a Bf-109 would.
By mid-morning, Lerche was executing dives at near vertical angles. The control surfaces remained responsive, the airframe stable even as speed approached the limits. He checked his altimeter and airspeed indicators obsessively, comparing mentally against Luftwaffe benchmarks. Every test confirmed the same brutal reality. The Corsair was faster, stronger, more agile in vertical engagements, and capable of sustaining energy where German planes bled it. Descending, he attempted a simulated dogfight scenario against his own mental projection of a German plane. He would approach as a Bf-109, assume the high-speed pursuit. He realized within seconds that the Corsair simply could not be chased down without taking severe risk. Every move he made to simulate interception revealed that speed and altitude were on the American pilot's side. Lerche's hands tightened on the stick. This wasn't just a superior fighter, this was a paradigm shift. After a short refueling and mechanical check, he attempted a series of emergency maneuvers. Rolls, Immelmans, split S's. Each time the Corsair executed flawlessly, forgiving errors that would have been fatal in German aircraft. Lerche's mind raced with the implications. If even a moderately skilled American pilot could exploit these advantages, Luftwaffe air superiority in the European theater, already strained by fuel shortages and attrition, would be in jeopardy. Landing the Corsair was another revelation. Tailwheel behavior, torque from the massive engine, and the long nose required precise attention. Lerche executed a textbook landing, noting how much skill would be required for inexperienced pilots to avoid ground accidents. Yet even here, the aircraft's raw power and stability shone through. The Corsair was dangerous in every sense, not just to enemy pilots in combat, but in the hands of a German pilot unfamiliar with its temperament. Back at the hangar, Lerche scribbled furiously in his notebook, diagrams and numbers flying across pages. He analyzed every performance metric, acceleration curves, climb rates, top speeds, energy retention figures, and gun stability assessments. He knew the data would be uncomfortable to German command. It challenged not just assumptions about air superiority, but the very pride of the Luftwaffe, an institution built on the belief that German engineering and pilot skill could meet any challenge. Weeks later, when the report reached the upper echelons of Luftwaffe command, it was received with polite interest and then silence. Lerche's observations were meticulously accurate, frightening in their implications, but the institution recoiled from the truth. Acknowledging the Corsair's superiority meant confronting the uncomfortable fact that German fighters, no matter how advanced, could no longer dominate the skies unchallenged. Better to bury the report than to shake morale or admit inferiority. Lerche's 45 minutes of flight had revealed the future of air combat in stark, unforgiving terms. The Corsair was not just a plane, it was a symbol of American industrial and tactical ingenuity. It was faster, stronger, more resilient, and capable of dictating engagements in ways German pilots could not match. And yet the military chose ignorance over adaptation, letting the reality of this technological leap slide into the shadows of institutional denial. For Lerche, the experience left an indelible mark. He knew what he had flown was revolutionary, he knew what the numbers meant, and he knew that the silence of command would cost lives in the months to come. The day faded into twilight as the Corsair sat quietly on the tarmac, a testament to ingenuity and the unforgiving nature of modern war. Lerche walked away, notebook in hand, a mixture of awe and dread in his chest. The aircraft had spoken, and its message was clear. The sky was no longer the Luftwaffe's domain.
The days after that first flight blurred into a sequence of planning and quiet anticipation. Lerche returned to Rechlin repeatedly, each time mentally retracing the path he had flown in the Corsair. The aircraft had left an impression that refused to fade, a raw, unapologetic reminder of what the Allies were capable of producing when no constraints limited design or production. In the hangar, mechanics and fellow test pilots whispered among themselves, half in awe, half in fear. They knew Lerche had flown something extraordinary,
but few dared say so aloud. Lerche spent hours cross-referencing every note, every stopwatch reading, every hand-drawn diagram. He tried to translate what he felt in the cockpit into something measurable, something that command could understand in terms of combat tactics and pilot survivability. Acceleration curves were mapped out on graph paper, climb rates plotted against altitude. He compared the Corsair's performance to every German fighter he had ever flown or studied. The nimble Bf-109, the heavy FW-190A8, even the experimental jet prototypes that were still little more than dreams. In every scenario, the Corsair held an advantage. He ran through mental combat simulations with a hypothetical opponent, a German ace attacking a Corsair at 25,000 feet. The German pilot dives to close distance, expects to force the enemy into a turning fight. Lerche's calculations made his stomach tighten. The Corsair would dive, yes, but it could then climb out of reach, pulling enough energy to strike again from above, dictating the engagement entirely. The traditional Luftwaffe doctrine of get inside the enemy's turn was obsolete. In real combat, chasing a Corsair without baiting it into a vertical trap was tantamount to suicide. During lunch breaks and quiet evenings, Lerche allowed himself small flights of imagination, scenarios of Luftwaffe wings meeting the Allies over France or the Low Countries. He saw the devastation that could come if pilots were forced into direct pursuit against Corsairs or F-6Fs, aircraft similar in design and purpose. He shuddered at the thought of young men trained to fight the way German doctrine dictated, encountering the brute speed and climb advantages he had catalogued so meticulously. The Corsair itself seemed almost alive in his memory. Lerche could feel its engine's torque twisting the fuselage during a hard climb, the way its wings absorbed stress during a vertical roll, the subtle vibrations as the propeller cut through the air at over 400 miles per hour. The aircraft demanded respect, demanded precise inputs, yet rewarded skill with an almost intoxicating sense of control. Compared to the Bf-109, which could feel twitchy and unforgiving at high speeds, the Corsair offered stability and raw power in equal measure. Lerche could not ignore the unspoken truth. This was not a plane to underestimate. When he finally compiled his report, it was more than technical. It was a manifesto of caution. He described every aspect of the aircraft, the inverted gull wings, which allowed for shorter, stronger landing gear and smoother carrier operations, the massive engine, which provided acceleration that could outrun any German interceptor in level flight, the durable airframe, capable of absorbing high-G maneuvers without tearing apart. He detailed the implications for air combat doctrine. Germans could no longer rely on superior turning or dive tactics alone. Energy fighting, the careful trade-off of speed for altitude, was now the critical factor. Traditional dogfighting risked annihilation. But when the report reached Luftwaffe High Command, Lerche's carefully measured warnings were met with polite acknowledgement and then buried. Officers read the conclusions in silence, made notes, and filed the document away. Lerche understood the reasoning, though he resented it deeply. To admit that the Allies had produced a superior fighter meant confronting uncomfortable truths, the limits of German engineering, the overconfidence of doctrinal tradition, and the stark reality of dwindling resources. Better to pretend the Corsair was just another Allied plane than to shake the morale of an already battered force.
Lerche was not one to simply accept silence. He pressed for briefings, for tactical discussions, for simulations that might help his colleagues understand what he had seen. But the response was the same: caution, obfuscation, avoidance. The Luftwaffe bureaucracy was a fortress of ego and pride, resistant to facts that undermined long-held beliefs. Every conversation with commanding officers reminded him of one immutable fact: the aircraft could change the outcome of battles, but the institution would not change. The tension inside Lerche grew as reports of American Corsair operations in the Pacific filtered through intelligence channels. He read accounts of pilots exploiting the same energy-fighting tactics he had tested, diving to gain speed, climbing out of reach, and striking from above. Allied fighter groups were applying principles he had proven in minutes of test flight, and German pilots in the Far East and Europe were already struggling to adapt. His heart sunk. The Corsair's presence in European skies might be only a matter of time, and by then, the Luftwaffe would be unprepared. Despite the bureaucratic walls, Lerche continued his own experiments. In private sessions at Rechlin, he ran new maneuvers, varying throttle input, testing climb angles, even attempting high-speed slaloms between marker pylons. Each exercise confirmed his original conclusions. The Corsair could outperform German fighters in almost every metric that mattered in combat, from acceleration to vertical retention to roll rate. It was a tactical revelation, a machine built to dominate, and he had the rare privilege of knowing exactly how and why. The psychological weight of the knowledge was almost unbearable. Lerche had always taken pride in his understanding of aircraft, his ability to gauge performance instinctively in the cockpit, but now he felt a kind of helplessness. He could see clearly the ways German fighters would be forced to fight and lose if doctrine remained unchanged. He tried to imagine ways to compensate, new formations, altered tactics, coordinated team maneuvers, but even these felt like patches on a structural problem that was bigger than improvisation could fix. Weeks turned into months. The war dragged on, each day bringing news of Allied bombing raids, fuel shortages, and increasing pilot casualties. Lerche's Corsair tests remained a secret among a small circle of engineers and test pilots. He occasionally caught glimpses of younger pilots practicing dogfights in FW-190s, their movements instinctive, confident, untainted by the lessons he had learned. He clenched his jaw, wishing he could warn them, train them, prepare them for what was coming. Then came the moment he had feared yet expected. Allied air operations intensified over Western Europe. German pilots reported encounters with enemy aircraft that behaved exactly like the Corsair he had flown. Accounts of sudden acceleration, rapid climbs, and seemingly impossible dive recoveries flooded intelligence channels. He read each report with a grim, silent rage. The Germans were being taught, painfully and lethally, what he had discovered months earlier. And still, his report remained shelved, a warning unheeded. At Rechlin, the Corsair itself seemed almost prophetic. Sitting on the tarmac, it was an icon of industrial prowess and tactical innovation, a silent monument to a truth too dangerous to speak out loud. Lerche walked past it countless times, touching the fuselage, remembering the roar of the engine, the thrill of acceleration, the way the air seemed to hum under its wings. Every detail was etched in his memory. The control stick's precise resistance, the throttle's raw responsiveness, the sensation of pulling out of a dive at maximum speed without fear of structural failure. He had flown the future of air combat, and yet his own side refused to acknowledge it. By the end of 1944, the consequences of this institutional silence became undeniable. German fighter units suffered catastrophic losses in engagements that mirrored the scenarios Lerche had imagined in his notebooks. Pilots skilled in traditional dogfighting tactics found themselves outclassed, outpaced, and outmaneuvered by American aircraft employing energy retention and boom and zoom tactics. Casualty reports mounted, aircraft were lost, and morale plummeted. Lerche's technical insights could have mitigated these losses, could have informed revised training protocols, new interception strategies, perhaps even aircraft design modifications. But the wheels of command had ground to a halt in their denial. Lerche himself continued his work, driven by a mix of professional curiosity and moral obligation. He documented every flight, every maneuver, every subtle quirk of the Corsair. Even in the quiet of Rechlin's hangars, he could hear the echoes of what might have been. German pilots surviving encounters they should not have had. Engagements ending differently if only his warnings had been heeded. The Corsair was more than an aircraft. It was a revelation, a demonstration of what modern air warfare had become.
And so the story of those 45 minutes of flight lived on, in Lerche's notebooks, in his memory, and in the grim statistics of air battles across Europe. The Luftwaffe had glimpsed the future, briefly and without understanding. The Corsair had spoken in the language of speed, climb, and maneuverability, and the response of German command was silence. For Hans-Werner Lerche, that flight was both triumph and tragedy, a confirmation of human ingenuity and a reminder of institutional failure, a demonstration that sometimes knowing the truth was not enough to change the course of history.
Winter approached, and the cold winds of northern Germany seeped through the hangar walls at Rechlin. Lerche wrapped himself in his flight jacket, staring once again at the Corsair resting under a sheet of canvas. Months had passed since that first test flight, yet the memory remained vivid. Every vibration of the engine, every surge of acceleration, every daring maneuver etched into his consciousness. The Corsair had become more than a machine. It had become a mirror, reflecting the uncomfortable truth of Luftwaffe's vulnerability. On an icy morning, Lerche climbed into the cockpit for what would be one of his final test flights before reassignment. The air was still, almost eerily calm as he conducted his pre-flight checks. His hands moved over the controls with practiced precision, recalling the tactile memory of that first takeoff. As the R-2800 engine roared to life, he felt the familiar shudder of raw power vibrating through the airframe. Each throttle adjustment was a reminder of the aircraft's brutal responsiveness. Taking off, Lerche immediately pushed the Corsair to its limits. He tested acceleration, climbing at steep angles, watching the altimeter spike upwards. The numbers were almost insulting in their superiority. A 40% climb advantage over the FW190, top speeds that could outrun anything Germany had in service. He executed a series of Immelmans and split-S maneuvers, each one confirming what he had feared. The Luftwaffe's traditional tactics would be rendered obsolete by such a machine. As he climbed higher, clouds swirling around the wings, Lerche ran through combat simulations in his mind. He imagined an American pilot diving from above, exploiting the Corsair's superior energy retention, pulling out of steep dives before a German plane could even close the distance. He could see the fatal mistakes unfold in real time. The FW190 pilot, trusting turn rates and dive recovery, suddenly outclassed by an aircraft designed to dominate every vector of engagement. The scenarios were chilling. Descending through thin air at over 400 miles per hour, Lerche tested the aircraft's structural integrity in high-speed maneuvers. The Corsair responded flawlessly, its airframe absorbing stresses that would have shaken a German fighter apart. He noted the gun platform's stability during aggressive rolls, mentally calculating how many rounds a pilot could deliver on target without losing control. Each test deepened his understanding, but also reinforced the uncomfortable reality. This was not merely a threat. It was a revolution in fighter design. Landing was always the final challenge. The Corsair demanded precision. The torque from the engine could swing the tail violently if not managed correctly, and the long nose restricted forward visibility during rollout. Lerche executed a textbook landing, yet even here the danger was tangible. He thought of the young pilots on the front lines, many of them with far less experience, facing these machines in combat. It was a grim thought, made worse by the knowledge that his warnings remained largely ignored. Back in the hangar, Lerche pored over his notes, drawing comparisons, calculating performance differentials, and revising his tactical recommendations. He suggested adaptations, new interception angles, energy retention maneuvers, even changes to formation tactics. Yet each time he presented his findings, the response was polite dismissal or bureaucratic inertia. Command was unwilling to admit that the enemy had leapfrogged German technology. Pride and tradition outweighed pragmatism, and the result would be catastrophic. Outside, the wind howled through Rechlin, rattling the hangar doors. Lerche stepped away from the Corsair, notebook clutched tightly in his hands,
a mixture of awe and frustration in his chest. The aircraft had spoken. Its design, performance, and raw capability communicated everything he needed to know. It could outclimb, outrun, and outmaneuver almost any German fighter. Its presence on European skies was inevitable, and the Luftwaffe was unprepared. As 1945 approached, reports from the front validated his fears. Engagement after engagement revealed pilots outclassed, formations broken, aircraft lost to tactics they could neither anticipate nor counter. Lerche's flight data had been accurate, his predictions had been precise, but the silence of command ensured that the advantage remained with the Allies. Lives were lost, machines destroyed, and morale eroded, all consequences of an institution unwilling to confront reality. Lerche continued flying, documenting, analyzing, but the thrill of discovery was tinged with despair. The Corsair had revealed the future of aerial combat, and yet his countrymen were marching blindly into it. He wrote in his journal, "To know the truth is not always to save it. Sometimes the knowledge itself is the burden." Each word carried the weight of countless young men who would pay the price for institutional denial. The Corsair eventually returned to American hands, shipped across the Atlantic for evaluation. Lerche never flew it again, yet the lessons of that brief 45 minutes lingered in his mind forever. He had seen what modern fighter warfare demanded: raw power, vertical energy advantage, speed, and the ability to dictate the fight. He had seen the uncomfortable truth that German pride and doctrine could not overcome innovation, and he had seen how silence in the face of truth could cost a nation dearly. Long after the war, in quiet reflection, Lerche would remember the roar of the R-2800 engine, the hum of air over the inverted gull wings, and the sensation of power unrestrained. The flight had been short, but its lessons were eternal. The Corsair had flown, and through it, Hans-Werner Lerche had glimpsed both the pinnacle of aviation ingenuity and the devastating consequences of ignoring reality. That day, Rechlin had witnessed more than a test flight. It had witnessed a revelation, one 45 minutes long, that the Luftwaffe chose not to see. The skies, once thought dominated, were shifting, and the future belonged to those willing to confront the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. For Lerche, that flight would always be the benchmark, a reminder that technology and truth wait for no one, and that the cost of denial is measured in lives, aircraft, and the irreversible lessons of history.